My own daughter kicked me out of the house I built with my own 2 hands. She stood there, furious, yelling, "My husband's family is moving in now, so you need to leave." I asked her, "Go where?" And without a flicker of emotion, she said, "Go live at the dump." So, I walked away. But I didn't run, and I sure wasn't defeated. I smiled to myself because this wasn't the end, not for me. It was a calculated step back, a quiet move in a bigger plan I had in motion. And sure enough, within just a week, everything came crashing down for them. They lost the house, their savings, their sense of control, everything. But before I tell you how that unfolded, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. The phone rang right after I'd finished washing up the lunch dishes. The sharp ring broke through the stillness of the afternoon like a slap. I jumped a little, it had been quiet for hours. My hands were still damp when I grabbed the phone, and I noticed the caller ID right away, Charlotte. My heart gave a hopeful little kick. She hadn't called in 2 months. "Dad?" Her voice came through soft and unusually sweet, like she was trying too hard. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Charlotte, sweetheart." I couldn't hold back the happiness in my voice. "You could never interrupt me. It's so good to hear from you." She let out a laugh, it sounded forced, like something rehearsed. "I've got a surprise for you," she said. "Michael and I are coming over tonight. His parents are coming too. We need to talk." I dropped the dish towel onto the counter, my mind already switching into planning mode. "Tonight? That's great. It's been too long since I've seen you. Should I cook something? I could pick up that Pinot Noir you like, the one from the vineyard we visited." "No need to worry about dinner, Dad," she replied, her tone shifting to something more direct. "Just be ready around 7. This is important." Something in the way she said it made me pause. It didn't feel casual. But I was lonely, and hearing her voice again made it easy to ignore my doubts. "Of course, honey," I said, doing my best to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I'll make sure everything's perfect. Are you staying overnight? I can get the guest rooms ready." "We'll see how things go," she said, almost cutting me off. "I've gotta run, but we'll be there at 7. Okay?" Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, thinking over what she'd said. A surprise. A conversation. Her words had a strange, formal ring to them. But maybe, just maybe, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Maybe she was finally ready to mend the rift that had only grown since her mother passed. I glanced at my watch. It was 2:45 p.m. That gave me just over 4 hours. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive with possibility. I started moving from room to room, looking at everything through Charlotte's eyes. The living room needed a good vacuum. The bathroom could use some fresh towels. I kicked into a sort of automatic mode, the same one that had gotten me through decades of engineering jobs. Precise. Focused. Task by task. First stop, the grocery store on Cedar Avenue. The March air was brisk, spring trying to break through winter's lingering chill. I picked up a bouquet of bright yellow daffodils, Charlotte's favorite since she was little. I also grabbed a bottle of that Pinot Noir she loved during Christmas. In the bakery section, I spotted some individual chocolate tarts. She used to beg for them when we'd stop by Powell's Books on the weekends. Back home, I arranged the daffodils in my late wife's crystal vase, the one Charlotte always admired when she was younger. The sunlight spilling through the kitchen window made them almost glow, like tiny golden suns. I set the dining table with our best china, the good stuff we rarely used. As I wiped down the counters, I caught myself humming. I hadn't done that in a long time. Something about the house felt different. It was as if it was holding its breath, waiting. I pulled out some old photo albums too, just in case the evening turned nostalgic. There was Charlotte at 5, gap-toothed and twirling in her yellow dress. At 16, rolling her eyes at me, but still smiling in that half-hearted teenage way. Then her wedding day, she looked radiant in that silk gown. I paused at that photo. Michael stood beside her in his rented tux, looking sharp, sure, but something about his smile always felt off. Fake. His parents were in that photo too. Robert, with his stiff businessman's grin. Margaret, forever wearing that look like she just smelled something unpleasant. They never really accepted me. Just the blue-collar engineer who clawed his way up from nothing. But I figured tonight could be different. Maybe this was a chance to reset things. A family reunion of sorts. I showered and put on my best casual shirt, the soft blue one Charlotte always said made my eyes pop. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a guy trying to shave off a few years with nothing but hope. My gray hair was combed neat, and I tried to hold on to the optimism in my eyes. By 6:30, I did one last check of everything. The house smelled clean, lemon-scented and fresh. The wine was breathing. The tarts were plated on fine bone china. Everything looked just right. I settled into my favorite chair by the front window, keeping an eye on Maple Street. The wait felt like Christmas morning, like something big and wonderful was right around the corner. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, one by one, as the sun dipped below the rooftops. 7 o'clock was creeping up fast. I heard car doors slam shut outside. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and glanced at myself once more in the hallway mirror. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out 4 blurry figures heading up the walkway. My heart started racing. I opened the door before they could even knock. "Charlotte." "Michael," I said, trying to sound warm and open. Charlotte stood there in a black coat, stiff as a statue. She looked like she was headed to a funeral, not dinner with her dad. No smile. No hug. "Hello, Dad," she said, and her voice had none of the tenderness from earlier. Michael shoved past her without a word. He reeked of booze, his eyes were red and glassy, and his whole posture screamed aggression. Then came his parents, Robert and Margaret Miller, marching up like royalty, dressed in coats that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They flanked the doorway like guards on a mission. Come in," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "I've got dinner ready." "I even opened that wine you love. We won't be staying for dinner," Margaret announced as she stepped right into my living room without asking. Her sharp eyes were already scanning everything I owned, like she was tallying up my life. She brushed her hand across my wife's crystal vase like it was nothing, sneering at the daffodils. "Such cheap flowers," she muttered. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. I had picked those daffodils because they were Charlotte's favorite. I'd remembered. "Dad, we need to talk," Charlotte said at last. Her eyes met mine, but they were colder than a January storm. "Have a seat," she added flatly. Robert Miller was already walking around my kitchen, snapping photos with his phone. Click. 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 Like he was documenting evidence. I looked at him, stunned. What's he doing?" Margaret didn't even look up. "Assessing property value," she said like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She lowered herself into Helen's favorite chair like she owned the place. Then came the blow. "My son's family is moving in," she said. "So you need to leave." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I grabbed the back of the sofa for balance. "What? I don't understand." "Leave where? This is my house. I've lived here for over 30 years. Charlotte's voice cut through me, cold and final. "Go to the dump if you want. We need this house." Michael stepped in closer. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. His words slurred just enough to make him dangerous. "We already talked to the cops. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I turned to Charlotte, desperate to find even a flicker of the daughter I raised. But her eyes, God, her eyes, they didn't see me as her father anymore. I was just in the way. Charlotte, baby girl, what's going on here? Is this about money? If you need help, you're leaving tonight, Margaret snapped. No room for discussion. No pity in her voice. You have 1 hour to pack up what you need. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch. My thoughts scrambled. The chocolate tart sat untouched on the table. The wine I'd opened for her, for all of us, just sat there, breathing quietly in its decanter, like it had no idea the night had turned. I whispered it under my breath. This is my home. Robert finished his little photo session and slipped his phone into his coat. Not anymore, he said coolly. Charlotte's our daughter-in-law now. And family takes care of family. That word, family, twisted like a knife. The irony didn't escape me. I glanced around the room, the house Helen and I had filled with laughter, effort, and love. For decades of memories stared back at me from the walls. Every corner held a story, a memory. And now? Now I was just a squatter in my own life. I looked at Charlotte again. The same woman who'd called me just hours ago, who'd said she had a surprise, who made me believe, just for one afternoon, that I still meant something to her. And now this? Something shifted inside me. Not fury. Not sadness either. It was something colder. More focused. Calculation. All right, I said, calm and quiet. The room fell still. They weren't expecting that. They thought I'd beg. Or cry. Maybe throw a fit. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Michael's smug stance wavered. I stood up and walked to the hall closet. Pulled out my old leather briefcase, the one I hadn't used in years. I'll pack some things, I said plainly. Silence stretched between us like a tight wire. They didn't know what to do with my calm. I headed to my bedroom, not rushing, just working through the motions. My body moved the same way it always had when I tackled a problem, methodical, clear-minded, exact. I reached for my old suitcase from the shelf. The leather was worn and cracked in places, but the hinges still snapped shut like they were new. Everything had its place. That's how I lived. That's how I packed. I'll go, I said again, steady and clear. My voice surprised them, it was too controlled. But remember, I added, I've been an engineer all my life. I folded my shirts like I'd done 1,000 times on work trips. I know how to build things. And after a beat, I added, and I know how to tear them down. Charlotte shifted where she stood, suddenly unsure. What do you mean by that? She asked. I looked up, met her eyes for the first time since this nightmare started. Nothing, sweetheart. Just wishing you the best in your new home. From the living room, Margaret's voice rang out, triumphant. Finally showing some sense. I kept packing, not looking at any of them. I gathered the essentials, bank records, insurance paperwork, the deed to the house, though God knows if it mattered anymore. I slipped in my engineering licenses and letters of reference, 40 years of a career reduced to documents. Charlotte lingered in the doorway, watching. Maybe there was a flicker of guilt in her. I don't know. But when Michael called her from the kitchen, she turned away without a word. I saved Helen's photo for last, the one from our anniversary dinner. She'd worn that deep blue dress, and her smile had lit up the restaurant. I stared at it for a moment, then slid it carefully into the front pocket of my briefcase. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to pack up a life. I rolled the suitcase into the living room. They were all still there, watching me like scavengers waiting for the last breath. Robert had gone back to taking photos, now focused on the antiques and more valuable items. Margaret was already rearranging Helen's throw pillows like the chair had always belonged to her. The utilities are under my name, I said, voice low. You'll need to handle that. We've got it covered, Robert answered without even glancing up from his phone. At the front door, I paused. Looked at each of them. These people I had once called family. People I had loved. Helped. Given to without thinking. Charlotte couldn't meet my eyes. Michael was already reaching for the wine I had opened to welcome them. Margaret was examining my wife's crystal collection like it was a garage sale. Well then, I said, adjusting my grip on the suitcase handle. I guess this is goodbye. No one responded. The cold March air hit me as I stepped outside. It stung a little, but in a way, it cleared my head. There was something honest about it, something cleansing. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk of my Honda, the same car Helen and I had bought 5 years back. Dependable. Familiar. Like her. I drove down streets that once meant something. Past Charlotte's old school, where I'd walked her to kindergarten. Past the park where we'd celebrated her graduation. Past the grocery store where I'd bought all the food for the dinner they'd rejected. I pulled into the lot of a 24-hour corner store, the ATM glowing harsh white in the dark. Slid in my card. Checked the balance. Pension. Social Security. Modest savings from decades of careful budgeting. Not rich, but enough. More than they thought I had. The Sunrise Inn was a no-frills place tucked along a strip of businesses about 15 minutes from where I used to live. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, and that's all I needed right then. The front desk clerk, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes and the look of someone who'd stopped caring hours ago, processed my check-in with barely a glance. No questions. No curiosity. 3 nights, paid in cash. Room 237. The room smelled like it had just been hosed down with industrial-strength carpet cleaner. Still, it had the basics, a narrow bed, a small table, a dated TV, and a bathroom stocked with stiff towels and soap bars barely the size of a matchbox. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I had a problem to solve. When morning came, sunlight filtered through those thin motel curtains, bright and unfamiliar, almost intrusive. For a second, I didn't know where I was. But then the memory of the night before came rushing back in like ice water down my spine. I opened the laptop again and logged into my online banking. The numbers popped up, steady and comforting. Pension checks. Social Security. Years of savings from a lifetime of working smart and living modestly. Enough to get things done. Then I accessed another account, one Charlotte and I had set up when she was 16. Her first checking account. I was listed as a co-owner back then, and apparently, she never bothered to take my name off. Probably forgot it even existed. The balance staring back at me made me smile for the first time in over a day. 30 years of giving, emotionally, financially, always sacrificing. I whispered into the stillness of the room, time to start taking some of it back. I shut the laptop, stepped into the motel's tight little shower, and let the hot water pour over me. It was like washing off the last of my confusion. The pain, the betrayal, they were still there, sure. But now they were organized. Compartmentalized. Just another problem to solve. Engineering logic applied to a human mess. By 9:30, I was standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights at Techmart. Rows of electronics, discount bins, and a bored young clerk with bright purple hair barely glanced up from her phone. I need a prepaid phone, I told her. Something simple. And a cheap laptop for travel. She pointed lazily toward the electronics wall without even breaking her scrolling rhythm. I picked out a no-frills flip phone and a budget laptop, nothing flashy, just functional. I paid in cash. No cards. No digital footprint. No way to trace it back to Norman Ross. Setting up a home office, she asked while scanning the boxes. Consulting, I replied. Close enough to the truth. Next stop was a real estate office, an old house converted into offices over on Division Street. The nameplate on the desk read Sarah Martinez, and she looked up from her screen with a smile that said she worked for every dollar she earned. "How can I help you today?" "I'm looking for a small apartment," I told her. "One bedroom. Month-to-month lease, if possible." I slid into the chair across from her. "I work online, so I'll need reliable internet. High speed, if you've got it." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "What kind of budget are we working with?" I gave her a number, enough to catch her attention but still modest. "Something that made me look like a dream tenant." "I've got a few that might work," she said. "There's a unit on Hawthorne with fiber optic. Should be perfect for remote work. When can I move in?" "Today." She raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." I gave her a small nod. "I like to move fast." She liked that answer. 2 hours later, I had signed the lease. A clean, quiet one-bedroom just 12 blocks from my old house. Close enough to watch from a distance. Far enough to avoid any chance run-ins. Sarah handed me the keys with a practiced hand. "Internet should be live tomorrow. Anything else I can help you with?" "Questions about the neighborhood?" "Yeah," I said, cracking a smile. "Where's the best coffee?" She laughed and rattled off 3 good cafes, all within walking distance. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Not a trace of personality yet, just empty space waiting to be filled. I set my suitcase down in the bedroom and unpacked the laptop on the kitchen counter. Sunlight streamed in through spotless windows, and the dust motes floating through the air looked almost alive, like something was starting to grow. I opened my new laptop and got to work. Step 1, build the list. Available resources. Time frames. Needed information. Then I began sketching out the first phase. Outside, Portland kept moving, people going about their lives, clueless. Inside, I was laying the groundwork for something careful. Something exact. Something no one would see coming. I pulled out my old phone and opened my contacts. There was Charlotte's office number. Michael's cell. The Miller's home address, technically, now my former address. So much information. So many opportunities. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. By Wednesday morning, the apartment had transformed. What had been a blank canvas now resembled a war room. My little command center. 4 manila folders lined the kitchen table, each labeled in black ink, Charlotte. Michael. Robert. Margaret. I opened my laptop and began filling in the blanks with what I already knew. Charlotte's work address. Her favorite lunch spots. Her daily routines. Michael's construction site. Where he clocked out. Where he drank afterward. The Miller's temporary mailing address. The house that used to be mine. But I needed more. Specifics. Leverage points. Weak spots. Thursday night, I was sitting at the bar in Riverside Casino, nursing a ginger ale. The bartender was a talkative woman named Linda, with a voice like sandpaper and a sharp wit to match. I nodded toward the blackjack tables. "That guy over there, he comin' a lot." Michael sat hunched over the cards, already looking tense. "Oh, him?" Linda smirked. "Yeah, he's a regular. Lost quite a bit over the past few weeks. Keeps saying he's got a big payout coming once a house sells." I sipped my drink, watching him melt into his chair with every hand. "Sounds confident," I said casually. Linda leaned in, voice low. "He better hope so. For his sake. Some of these guys really don't like being kept waiting, you get what I'm saying." Michael got up from the table and stumbled a bit, his face red from too much booze and building frustration. I snapped a few photos from across the room using the zoom on my new camera. The shots were clear, him drunk, his behavior, the people he was with. Solid evidence. On Friday morning, I trailed Michael to his job site downtown. He worked for Henderson Development, one of those mid-level firms tucked inside a sleek glass building on 3rd Avenue. Around 11:30, he came out like he was heading off for a long lunch break, and he wasn't alone. The woman with him looked about 30, auburn hair, sharp business suit, definitely someone who earned more than Michael could ever hope to. They walked close, too close for just co-workers. He kept placing his hand on the small of her back, little touches that said, intimate, more than friendly. I watched from across the street and caught it all, her hand resting on his arm, their body language, and the kiss she gave him before driving off. More evidence in the bag. Later that afternoon, I headed to the Multnomah County Clerk's office. Public records spelled out Robert Miller's financial disaster in painful detail. He'd sunk money into a failed restaurant venture, racked up over $43,000 in tax liens, and even had his business license suspended for not paying state fees. The Miller family wasn't just struggling, they were in deep, drowning in it. That night back in my apartment, I laid everything out on the kitchen table, photos, printed records, handwritten notes. There were Michael's gambling debts, his empty promises about money from the house sale, and his affair with a woman who had a lot to lose if it ever got out. Then there was Robert's tax mess, that suspended license, and Margaret, entirely dependent on a husband whose financial world was already falling apart. I had each of them boxed up in folders now, and every one was loaded with enough firepower to ruin them completely. I leaned back in my chair, looking it all over with the kind of quiet pride an engineer feels when he finds every flaw in a faulty structure. I'd mapped out the weak spots, pinpointed where the real pressure lived. The foundation they'd built their so-called victory on. It was crumbling worse than they knew. My phone buzzed, my old phone, the one with Charlotte's number still saved. That was my cue. Time to start bringing this whole thing down. Saturday morning rolled in with that same clear-headed focus I used to bring to engineering problems. I spread out my files again on the table, not for more analysis this time, but to line up my next moves. First up, Charlotte. Squeeze her financially and the panic would be instant. Second, Robert. Get the government involved, and whatever resources he had left would be swallowed whole. Third, Michael. Between his gambling and his affair, he had pressure points all over. And last, Margaret. She depended on the others so much that when they cracked, she'd fall apart right behind them. By 10:30 I was across from David Ortiz, manager at First National Bank. Same place where Charlotte and I had opened her first checking account nearly 2 decades ago. I need to update the access rules on this joint account, I told him, sliding over the paperwork. David looked everything over with calm efficiency. These changes will go into effect right away, Mr. Ross. You'll be listed as the primary holder, and large withdrawals will need your approval. Perfect, I nodded. Also, notify me of any attempts to access the funds. He tapped a few keys, making notes. Want to set a withdrawal limit for the secondary holder? Yeah. Cap it at $200 per day. Anything more needs my written okay. Charlotte was going to feel that wall the next time she tried to pay rent or buy groceries. The shock would hit her fast, and hard. After lunch, I made my way to the office of James Parker, attorney at law. His wall was covered in degrees and credentials, comforting, honestly. I've put about $23,000 into that house over the last 5 years, I explained, showing him my carefully saved receipts. Roof work, kitchen remodel, foundation repairs. It's all documented. James looked through the paperwork with the kind of care that makes his hourly rate sting a little less. You've got rights to that house, he said. You've contributed financially in a big way, and it's all well documented. Good, I said. But I don't want to go legal just yet. I want them to see it for themselves, that they screwed up. That they underestimated me. He raised an eyebrow. You're planning to let them realize it on their own. Exactly. They took my house thinking I'd just lie down and take it. I want them to understand how wrong they were before I bring the hammer down. James nodded slowly. It's a unique strategy, but you've got the legal ground to stand on when you're ready. Perfect. I'll be in touch when the time's right. My last stop was the Oregon Department of Revenue on Commercial Street. The woman behind the counter looked worn out, probably in her 50s, and she barely blinked as I handed her a manila envelope. Anonymous report. Robert Miller. Business owner. The folder held everything: signs of unreported income, dodgy deductions, and his suspended business license. She stamped it and tossed it into a basket labeled investigation required. The state would take care of the rest, cold, slow, and relentless, just the way I needed it. By 5 o'clock, I was back in my apartment. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I almost never do. But this moment, it called for a quiet celebration. Outside the window, Portland city lights were starting to flicker on, one by one, like little sparks of promise. Everything was moving into place. Charlotte wouldn't feel the pressure right away. But soon enough, she'd run headfirst into the financial walls I'd built. Robert? His little run-in with the Oregon Tax Board would begin within a couple of weeks. And Michael, well, his gambling issues were about to snowball with interest he wasn't expecting. I opened my laptop and began outlining Phase 2. Monday morning arrived right on time, just like I'd planned. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text alert from the bank. Someone was trying to access the restricted account. Not once, several times. All failures. That meant Charlotte had just hit her first brick wall. I poured myself a coffee and pulled up the bank's activity log. 7 failed login attempts in under 15 minutes. 2 calls to customer support. 1 formal request to unlock the account. All denied, just as I'd arranged. At 11:23, the phone rang. Charlotte. I let it roll to voicemail, then played the message back while stirring sugar into my coffee. Dad, it's Charlotte. There's a problem with the bank account. They're saying you've blocked access. Please call me back, it has to be some kind of mistake. By 11:41, she called again. This time, the edge in her voice was sharper, more desperate. Dad, where are you? I can't pay rent. I couldn't even buy coffee. My card was declined in front of everyone. Please, whatever this is, we need to fix it now. While that one played in the background, I made lunch. Call 3 came a little later, and her voice broke, just a bit, when she said the word, help. By early afternoon, she'd looped in Michael. I knew that because the tiny listening device I'd left behind during a little scouting trip, tucked just near their bedroom window, was picking up voices through the paper-thin walls. Dad's locked the money, Charlotte said, her voice pitching higher with panic. How are we supposed to pay the mortgage? Michael sounded like he was already halfway through his second drink. Relax, babe. We'll figure something out. Maybe sell some stuff around the house. This can't be random, Michael. The bank says it was restricted by the primary account holder. You think your dad planned this? He asked, clearly skeptical. Come on. He wouldn't even know how. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Michael's complete lack of imagination was going to make my work so much easier. Around 3:30, the mail showed up. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out, official letterhead from the Oregon Department of Revenue, addressed to Robert Miller's business address. The audit had begun, triggered by a quiet little tip from an anonymous source. Mine. Charlotte's phone rang at 4:15. Through the listening device, I heard her pacing in what used to be my kitchen. Robert, it's Charlotte. We've got a serious problem. Actually, multiple problems. The panic in her voice had dulled now, giving way to a tired, worn-down resolve. The state wants to audit your business. And somehow Dad's locked us out of our account. Robert sounded dismissive. That can't be right. Your father doesn't have access like that. Well, according to the bank, he does. He's listed as the primary account holder. He can lock us out anytime he wants. There was a long pause before Robert spoke again, this time, much more quietly. Where is your dad now? I don't know, Charlotte said. He won't answer his phone. I even asked the neighbor. She hasn't seen him since since he left. Another silence. Charlotte, Robert said, what exactly did we walk into that night? She dropped into Helen's old kitchen chair with a long sigh. The creak of the old wood came through my headset clear as day. I think we seriously underestimated him. Wednesday morning hit, and with it, phase 2. I laid everything out across my kitchen table like pieces of a case file. 12 high-res photos of Michael, all taken at the right angles, all showing him with that red-haired colleague of his. Outside her apartment. Inside her car. Sharing lunch downtown. All of it during hours he was supposed to be working. Next to the photos, records of his gambling debts, bar receipts, statements from casino employees, everything I needed to establish a pattern of recklessness. 2 envelopes sat ready, one marked for Henderson Development's HR department. The other? For Charlotte's office. By 10 a.m., Henderson's HR team was reviewing an anonymous package detailing an employee with gambling issues, drinking on the clock, and misusing work hours. Not a good look for a company that prides itself on trust and family values. At 11:30, my surveillance picked up Michael's phone call. He was pacing the parking lot at work, and his voice was trembling. They fired me, he said. Just like that. Someone sent them stuff, photos, statements, everything. Charlotte's reply snapped back like a rubber band stretched too tight. What kind of stuff? Photos of me at the casino. Statements about my debts. They said I'm a risk to their image. Michael, we can barely buy groceries. How are we supposed to survive if you're not working? Then came a knock, mail arriving at Charlotte's office. A few hours later, the conversation my device picked up sounded a lot different. I know about your affair, Michael. Charlotte's voice was ice now. Dead calm. Lethal. I want everything. Half of whatever's left, Charlotte said. The photos had done their job. Charlotte, please, Michael begged. Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. She wasn't having it. Photos don't lie, Michael. You've been sneaking around with some woman while I've been here trying to keep our family from falling apart. His voice cracked. I was desperate. The gambling, things got out of control. She meant nothing. She was just there after what we did to my dad. Charlotte didn't even blink. And now this? You're just like him. A disappointment. That one stung. The irony of her words didn't miss me. She couldn't see it yet, but she was comparing her cheating husband to the very man she'd betrayed, not realizing that man was behind every domino falling in her life. Michael was spiraling now. This can't all be random. First your dad's money's locked up. Then I lose my job. Then these photos. Someone's doing this to us. He paused. But who would even care enough to ruin us? The silence that followed was golden. Even through the static of my surveillance device, I could hear the weight of realization beginning to settle. Your father, Michael finally whispered. We threw out a man who spent 40 years solving problems with ruthless efficiency. Charlotte scoffed. Her laugh was bitter, without warmth. Dad? He couldn't even organize a birthday party, let alone pull off some grand revenge plot. Michael didn't back down. Then explain it. Explain how our entire life collapsed in just 1 week. I shut my laptop, leaned back, and poured another glass of wine. Michael had been dismantled both personally and professionally. Charlotte was staring down financial ruin and a marriage unraveling by the hour. And both of them were finally starting to grasp the scale of their misjudgment. Tomorrow, I'd initiate Phase 3. Friday arrived with the quiet certainty of physics. I knew they'd show up today, rattled, furious, convinced they could force their way out of consequences with a little drama and maybe some intimidation. I laid everything out on the kitchen table like blueprints, bank records, property receipts, legal letters, every document clean, accurate, and rock solid. At exactly 10:30, the knock came. Officer Davis stood at my door, face worn with the look of a man dealing with another family dispute. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Margaret Miller sitting stiffly in the back of a patrol car, wearing the smug look of someone certain justice was about to fall in her favor. "Mr. Ross," Davis said, "we received a complaint. Your family's claiming you've been harassing them. They'd like you to leave them alone." I opened the door wide and motioned toward the neatly arranged paperwork on the table. "I haven't broken a single law, officer. I'm just exercising my rights, legally and responsibly, as an account holder and a property investor." He stepped inside and took a look, reviewing the attorney letters, investment receipts, the banking documentation. His tone shifted. Less official, more annoyed. "These all check out. What exactly are they accusing you of?" "Let's see," I said. "Restricting access to an account I legally control. Consulting a lawyer about my property. Filing a tip to the tax office. All above board." I handed him James Parker's business card. "Feel free to verify anything with my legal counsel." 20 minutes later, Davis delivered the verdict outside the patrol car, and ruined Margaret's day. No grounds for charges. No harassment. No restraining order. Nothing criminal. Just the legal fallout of their own poor decisions. Margaret didn't take it well. She spent the rest of her afternoon stomping door to door through my old neighborhood, spreading gossip like gasoline. "That man is dangerous," I heard her say to Mrs. Patterson through the surveillance feed. "He's threatening our family. Trying to take our home." Mrs. Patterson, bless her, wasn't biting. "Has he done anything illegal, Margaret?" "Well, no, but, then maybe talk to him instead of dragging the rest of us into it." Margaret didn't have much better luck with the other neighbors. Most had known me for years. They didn't buy the sudden villain narrative. The idea that Norman Ross had gone rogue just didn't stick. By 3 o'clock, Robert Miller had shifted tactics. He hired a private investigator. Rick Stone. Parked right across from my apartment in a dull gray sedan, with all the subtlety of a man used to catching philandering husbands, not strategic engineers. I photographed him from my own window. Got the plate number. Spotted the camera gear in the passenger seat. Amateur hour. Honestly, I'd been expecting someone like him the moment I moved into this perfectly placed apartment. Let him observe. Let him document. Grocery runs. Library trips. Morning coffee. Nothing illegal. Nothing threatening. Just routine. My phone buzzed. A text from James Parker. Family attempted to file a harassment complaint. Dismissed for lack of evidence. All your activity remains legal. Perfect. They were reacting exactly how I wanted, panicked, flailing, making predictable mistakes. Margaret and company still thought I was acting out of bitterness. They hadn't realized yet, I wasn't acting at all. I was executing. And Phase 3. That would make the difference crystal clear. Saturday morning came. I had expected to feel more. Instead, I sat in silence, surrounded by evidence of a plan carried out with precision. Charlotte's frozen accounts. Michael's fall from grace. Robert's business now flagged by the state. It had all worked. Everything had moved like clockwork. But there was no joy in it. While organizing the last of my files, I found a manila envelope I'd nearly forgotten. Inside were letters from Helen, written 40 years ago during the brief time we'd separated. Back when we were young, and her mother was trying to tear us apart. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the first one. Her handwriting rushed back to me like a scent I hadn't smelled in years. The words hit me harder than I expected. Helen always had this way of looking past my technical fixes and seeing the deeper human mess underneath. Even when she was furious with me, she never lost sight of what really mattered. I sat there, flipping through her letters, each one packed with her quiet wisdom about family, conflict, and forgiveness. In one of them, she wrote, "Norman, revenge never brings anyone happiness. But justice, that's worth going after. There's a big difference between making someone suffer and making things right." That phrase, making things right, just kept playing on repeat in my head as I drove to Riverside Cemetery. Helen's grave rested beneath an old oak tree. Her headstone was plain gray granite, carved with the dates that marked our 37 years together. I hadn't been back since the funeral, 6 months ago. But today, pride wasn't enough to keep me away. I needed her voice. Her clarity. "What would you do, sweetheart?" I asked, staring down at her name like a fool talking to a rock. "Would you forgive them? Or would you fight to set things right?" The wind stirred the oak leaves, and for a second, it felt like she was answering, not in some spooky way, just memories so vivid it was almost like she was still there. "You've already won, Norman." I could hear her say it. "They know they can't scare you. They've finally realized they completely underestimated you." But the truth was, crushing them hadn't brought any peace. It didn't bring back our home. It didn't fix Charlotte's selfish betrayal. I reached out and ran my fingers over Helen's name. "I've torn it all down," I whispered. "And it still doesn't feel like a win." And just like that, memory filled in the silence with her soft, knowing laugh. "That's because you're not a destroyer, sweetheart. You're a builder." She was right. She'd always seen it. What made me different? I spent my life solving problems by constructing things, not blowing them up. That's what made me an engineer. And what made me her husband. I sat there a while longer, the sun filtering through the branches, warming the granite under my hand. "There's a difference between making them pay, and making things right," I said out loud, almost like a prayer, echoing her words from that letter. That evening, back in my little apartment, I cleared off the kitchen table and spread out every legal document I had, same as before. But this time, I wasn't looking to destroy. I was drafting something else entirely. A plan. A new solution. One that aimed to correct the wrongs, not through revenge, but through justice. I opened my laptop and started writing, to James Parker, this time. Not about sabotage or secrets. But about real, legitimate legal action to reclaim my property. Phase 3 wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about integrity. About showing there was still a line between me and the people who'd burned that line to the ground. By Monday morning, the clarity Helen gave me had settled in fully. I organized every piece of documentation into 3 neat stacks, one for the property investments, one for the financial trail, and one for the criminal activity. Everything backed by evidence. Everything by the book. At 9:30 sharp, I sat across from Detective Sarah Johnson at the Portland Police Bureau. She reviewed the files with the calm focus of someone who'd seen more than her share of family betrayals turning legal. "Mr. Ross, you've got enough here for criminal charges," she said, flipping through Robert Miller's tax records. "We're looking at financial fraud, tax evasion, maybe even conspiracy to defraud you of your property." I handed over the photos of Michael's gambling habits. "I'm not after revenge," I said, clear and steady. "I just want justice, the right way." She gave me a look. Just a flicker of surprise. "Most people in your shoes want blood. My wife taught me there's a difference between making people pay and making things right." By 11 o'clock, arrest warrants were in motion. Robert Miller was going down for tax evasion. The same careful planning I'd used for my personal counterattack was now fueling a legal investigation. And it worked just as smoothly. The emergency court hearing kicked off at 1 p.m., Judge Williams didn't waste time. Middle-aged, no-nonsense, and sharp as a tack, she reviewed my investment records with laser focus. Mr. Ross contributed $23,000 to improve this property over a 5-year period, James Parker told the court. He has clear legal standing as a co-owner. The judge flipped through receipts, contractor invoices, and bank statements. This house is to be returned to its rightful owner, she ruled. The defendants have 48 hours to vacate. Her gavel struck like the final bolt clicking into place on a well-built machine. By 3 p.m., the eviction notice was delivered. I stood quietly across the street as a sheriff's deputy handed Margaret Miller the official court order. Her expression cycled through the usual stages: shock, rage, a flurry of mental math. Only this time, she wasn't up against just me. She was up against the law. Charlotte stepped out of the house, my house, carrying a single suitcase. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, like she couldn't quite process what was happening. Michael came out right behind her, that blank, empty look of a man who'd lost everything by his own hand. They didn't yell. They didn't plead. They didn't even glare. They packed the car in silence, the way people do when they've finally run out of manipulations, excuses, and escape routes. It was over. They'd hit a wall they couldn't lie their way around. At 5 p.m. I stepped through the front door of my home for the first time in 2 long weeks. Everything looked the same, but it all felt different. Not because they'd changed anything, but because I had. The kitchen window lit up the room just like it had the day Charlotte first called me with her big surprise. Only this time, the light shone on something solid, on justice reclaimed, not revenge fulfilled. I picked up Helen's crystal vase from the dining room table. Somehow, it had survived everything untouched. Just like my sense of what's right had made it through my own brief storm of rage. Tomorrow, Charlotte would have to decide how to move forward, without relying on money that was never hers to begin with. But tonight, I was home. And when Friday morning came, it brought a quiet, honest kind of peace. The kind that comes not from winning, but from doing the right thing. I stood at the threshold of my house, holding just one suitcase and a lifetime of dignity that no one could take from me again. The locksmith had wrapped up his work the night before. The keys jingling in my pocket were mine again, legally, morally, and in every way that mattered. As I stepped through the front door that morning, I was greeted not by home, but by the remnants of their chaos. Takeout containers sat crusted in the sink. Some cheap magazines were still spread across my coffee table. In the bathroom, Charlotte's pricey face cream lay abandoned beside the faucet like she'd simply forgotten where she was. They had treated my house like a hotel, some temporary stopover, never understanding they were squatting in someone else's life. I spent that morning clearing it all out. Not out of anger. This wasn't revenge cleaning. I approached it with the kind of quiet, focused determination Helen would have appreciated. Like an engineer tackling a malfunction, assess the damage, prioritize the repairs, and carry out the fix. By the afternoon, the house was already beginning to feel like itself again. New locks were in place. I'd installed a security system and set out fresh flowers in Helen's crystal vase, the one they hadn't managed to ruin. The air seemed lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves were starting to remember who they belonged to. Then, right at 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. Charlotte's name lit up the screen. Dad? Her voice was barely more than a whisper, none of that sharp confidence from 3 weeks ago. Just a fragile, almost childlike uncertainty. Can we talk? I almost ended the call right then. I had every right to. But Helen's voice echoed in my memory, there's a difference between justice and cruelty. So I stayed on the line. We're talking, I said. I realize I was wrong. Her words came slowly, like each one scraped against something raw inside her. Everything's falling apart. Michael's drinking again. The Millers are blaming me for Robert's arrest. I lost my job, I can't even focus long enough to function. I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte, I said, calmly. There was a beat of silence before she asked, are you really? That hit me harder than I expected. Was I sorry? Or was I just satisfied watching the fallout unfold exactly the way I'd calculated? And then I realized, it was both. Yes, I said softly. I'm sorry. Sorry that it had to come to this. Dad, forgive me. Please. I know I hurt you, but I'm still your daughter. I let that sit there in the space between us, the same space that had been empty for 18 days since she last called me family. Charlotte, forgiveness is one thing, I finally said. But trust? That's something else entirely. You made your choice the day you threw me out of my own house. Now you have to live with that. I can't survive without my money, she said, almost gasping. You survived 34 years learning how to rely on me for everything, I replied, steady. Maybe now it's time to learn how to rely on yourself. Dad, please, I spent 30 years giving you everything I had, my time, my money, my heart, my home. And the second it became inconvenient, you tossed all of it away like it meant nothing. I looked around the sunlit kitchen, the same kitchen I'd been exiled from, and felt the lesson settle in. That taught me something important about what I was actually protecting. The line was quiet except for her breathing. Goodbye, Charlotte, I said, and hung up. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine, the kind I used to save for anniversaries or promotions, and I sat down in Helen's favorite chair. The house was silent, but not empty. Not anymore. Something had shifted. Their presence had been cleared out, yes, but more importantly, something new had moved in, self-respect, rebuilt with structure and care, not vengeance. Justice had taken root here. Helen, I said aloud, speaking to the quiet corners of the room, I did it right. Justice won. And for a brief moment, I could almost hear her laugh. I could feel her pride in the creaks of the floorboards, the gentle way the air moved through the space we built together. I wasn't just the man who won anymore. I was the man who knew the difference between winning and being right. Outside, Portland carried on with its ordinary life. Inside, I sat back and began thinking, not about destruction, but about what I'd build next. If this story moved you, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear what happened next, or discover another powerful story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.